Chapter 1: Ashes and Iron. The war had lasted 100 years. It began over borders no one remembered and ended only because there were too few soldiers left to bury the dead. Across land and sea, kingdoms that once flourished under banners of pride had dissolved into smoke and cinder. Even the sky seemed scarred, as if so many battles had burned hesitation into the sun. On the mountain passes, orcs roared their last charges, war drums beating hollow thunder through stone. Elven archers loosed final quivers into fields already soaked dark. Dwarven siege wagons lay twisted in mud, wheels half melted by fire. Goblin skirmishers, the quick, clever kind, picked through the fallen, searching for food, coin, anything that still held value. At sea, merfolk fought in choked waters, while above them, harpies rained fire on ships and cities without remorse. Each race fought for what little remained, and none stepped away unbroken. Then came the Eight. Every kingdom told that part differently. Some called them gods in mortal flesh. Others swore they were spirits dragged out of old prophecies. All agreed on three things. They arrived when the world was close to collapse. They came wrapped in mist and plain gray cloth, and they carried a kind of power no army had ever fielded. One for each race, 8 sorcerers whose strength lay not in slaughter, but in understanding. They did not conjure plague or flash droughts. They conjured terms. Through the voice of the storm, whatever that meant in each tongue, they reached every throne that still had someone sitting on it. Kings and queens of shattered realms gathered under a truce no one could afford to refuse. For the first time in a century, they raised their swords not in vengeance, but in oath. The era of truce was declared. The long, uneven road back from the brink began. The legacy of the war did not wait for history to name them. They lay in plain sight. Fields stood fallow, scattered with fragments of broken armor. The bones of forgotten soldiers pressed up through poisoned soil. Rivers ran brown with ash when summer storms came. Empty buildings stood like ghosts, hollow and unsure what they had once been. Life went on anyway, stumbling and stubborn. In the north, orcs and goblins rebuilt strongholds along steep ridges and old fault lines, walls higher than before. Smoke rose from new forges. Miners went back into peaks to dig for metal and memory. To the south, elves and dwarves shared labor without liking it. Forest beside quarry, song beside hammer. Across the sea, humans and lizard folk traded instead of raiding, while merfolk patrolled deep channels that had become fragile trade routes instead of battlefields. On parchment, peace held. In the mountains of Grukthar, it just meant hunger with a longer timeline. Goblins knew how to patch a life together out of scraps. Their villages clung to the slopes, built from the wreckage of older wars. Timber warped by fire, roofs mended with beaten flat plates of old armor. Chimneys leaned, doors stuck in swollen frames. The people worked, schemed, survived. For most, that counted as success. At the edge of one such valley, a mine waited to be born. Ludo sat by its mouth with his back against the broken haft of a pike that had once carried a war banner. The cloth was long gone. The scar on his jaw was not. He was broad-shouldered for a goblin, taller than most, green skin dulled by dust and sweat. His beard ran thick across his jaw and chin, flecked pale where heat and time had singed it. His bare scalp shone under the same thin film of dust. In front of him, a rough parchment was pinned to a crate, a mining deed, signed and stamped. His reward for a lifetime of doing as he was told. Behind him, children laughed. 3 of them, barefoot, chased one another across the packed dirt like the valley had never seen a battlefield. Their shrieks cut through the thin mountain air. Inside the crooked shack that passed for a house, pots rattled, something boiled. The day moved on. Rena stood in the doorway, one shoulder braced against the frame. Goblin like him, shorter, leaner, green skin a shade lighter where the sun had caught it over the years. Her brown hair was tied back in a rough knot, streaked with lighter strands from long days outdoors. Her eyes were mismatched, one a deep, steady brown, the other a pale hazel that caught the light strangely. She watched him with her arms folded, mouth set in a line that was more worry than anger. "You've spent all the coin," she said at last. Her voice wasn't sharp, just tired. Ludo kept sketching lines in the dirt with a bit of chalk. Depths, supports, where the first cut of the tunnel should go. He answered without looking up. Every last piece, he said. The equipment's old, but the veins are still here. The war dried up the surface mines. No one's dug under these ridges properly in 50 years. Rena stepped out onto the dust, folding her arms tighter against the chill. And if you're wrong, she asked. He glanced up then, the half-scarred side of his mouth pulling into a grin that had talked him out of trouble, and into it more times than he could count. Then I'll dig deeper, he said. She blew out a breath, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her. You promised me a life without battlefields. This isn't a battlefield, Ludo said. He nodded towards the dark cut in the rock. It's opportunity, one good strike of ore, and we'll have a forge of our own. Maybe one day a little castle by one of those lakes down valley. You and the kids won't be mending worn boots forever. A castle, She walked closer and laid a hand on his shoulder, thumb brushing a groove worn in the old leather of his vest. For a goblin who can hardly afford dinner? For a goblin who's done fighting for other people's castles, he replied. This time we build something worth bleeding for. Down in the town, a blacksmith's hammer kept a steady rhythm. Metal on metal, the heartbeat of an age trying to remember how to make instead of destroy. The wind carried the sound up the slope, thin but insistent. Rena listened, then looked back at him. Her mismatched eyes softened, wary pride edging out fear. Just don't die in a hole chasing it, she said. That's the point, Ludo said. I've already done my dying for kings. This is for us. She squeezed his shoulder once and turned towards the house. The sun was dropping behind jagged peaks, turning the sky the color of cooled embers. Shadows stretched out from the mine mouth, like a warning or a welcome. Hard to say which. Ludo watched the light slide away from his claim. The parchment on the crate fluttered in a small gust, official seals dull in the low sun. He rested a calloused hand on the corner to still it. I'll make it real, he murmured. Ash and iron. That was what goblins had always been given, the burnt remains and the tools to dig through them. This time, if he had any say, it would be enough. From the mountain's shadow, the wind rose and howled down the valley. It slipped through the empty shafts of old workings, like breath through a pipe organ, turning a single gust into a choir of hollow voices, a sound like 1,000 debts unpaid. Ludo listened. The noise should have made his skin crawl. Instead, it settled under his ribs like a familiar weight. The era of truce had begun. The kings and queens of the world had sworn their oaths, signed their parchments, shaken hands under the watch of gray-cloaked strangers. None of that changed what a goblin had to do to eat. At the edge of a forgotten valley, with a deed, a pit, and a family, one goblin sat in the dust and dreamed not of banners, but of ledgers and roofs and walls that no crown could take without a fight. One goblin dreamed of a kingdom of his own,